Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to talk about the Mid-America Regional Monarch Conservation Strategy, and just going to go ahead and throw out some acronyms for you right at the start. So I work for MAFWA, as does Ed, which is the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which is quite a mouthful, so we're just going to go with MAFWA. And this slide has way too many words on it, so I'm not really going to talk about it that much, but I just want to give a sense of a little bit of history of what's gone into this regional monarch conservation strategy process, starting with AFWA, which is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, the national association, really recognizing the place that states have in their jurisdictional authority over monarch butterflies in general because they're resident wildlife of the state. So they passed a few memorandum and resolutions, encouraging states to sort of engage in monarch conservation starting in 2014. They did a report on kind of what states are doing so far. And then, at some point, it became clear that MAFWA actually had quite a geographic overlap with the states that were sort of most important, I'll put that in quotes, but some of the states that were really being emphasized as important for monarch conservation in the Midwest and Upper Midwest. So MAFWA has taken leadership on this strategic planning process on a regional level and have hosted some meetings, and we were actually here in Burnet, Texas in January of this year, just outside of Austin. We had a great meeting out there. And so this process really kind of started in earnest at the beginning of this year. And just to kind of give an overview of what we're doing, we are creating a regional monarch conservation framework. We're going to call it a strategy. And we're working really closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure that this is in alignment with the processes that the service is going through in their species status assessment, which they are in right now. And they are basically assessing where's the monarch population now, what are the threats to it, and what do they think is going to happen to it in the future. So they have a policy for the evaluation of conservation efforts. And we really fit into that because that is what the service uses to look at existing conservation efforts as well as plans that are in place for the near future to conserve the monarch butterfly. And they're going to look at that when they're determining whether the species should be listed as threatened or not. So we're making sure that our regional conservation strategy informs that process for them. And so the overall strategy that we're using is to leverage the authority of state wildlife agencies, state fish and wildlife agencies, and the resources of many partner organizations, many of which are here today, to implement and get on the ground that 1.6, 1.8 billion milkweed stems that of course need to be embedded in forage habitats with other nectar resources. And then all of that is to build towards this 6 hectares on average of overwintering habitat in Mexico, which you've all already heard about today. So just to give you a sense of the timescale and the geography of this, we're on a pretty tight timeline for creating this regional conservation strategy. The first draft is going to be completed in October of this year, and then you can see that we have a few more drafts at the beginning of 2018, and we'll essentially have our completed regional strategy in mid-2018, which will give a year for the Fish and Wildlife Service to look at that, look at what conservation is already on the ground and what plans we have in place to help the monarchs before they make their listing decision in June of 2019. Just to talk about the geography, this is one of the newest maps that the Fish and Wildlife Service has put out. And I really like it because it shows these monarch butterfly conservation units for the entire lower 48. And it gets across the point that we have monarchs everywhere in these states, and everybody has a role to play. Everybody can contribute to their conservation, but you might not be able to see sort of the labels of the different colors, but essentially this dark purple area here is called the North Core, and that's the area that the best available science is telling us is the most important for monarch breeding and production that results in the overwintering population in Mexico. And then this less dark purple area is the South Core, and that includes where we are right now, and that's really important for the spring and the fall migration as well as some breeding. And that is kind of another way of looking at this other map that everyone's probably seen, kind of just showing where the monarchs go throughout the year. the funnel that they take kind of in the spring and the fall, and then that breeding region in the north. And so that feeds into the states that we have participating in this regional conservation strategy. So the orange states are all participating individually as states in this regional strategy through their state fish and wildlife agencies. It includes the 13 member states of MAFWA, as well as Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas in order to capture that migratory corridor in the south. And then because there are some important breeding, especially areas in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, we've also gotten the Northeast states involved through their association, MAFWA. So they're participating as MAFWA, and whereas the orange states are all participating as individual states. The graph at the top is really just because I wanted to put a picture there, but the overall way that we're going to be approaching this regional conservation strategy is based on science coming out of the MCSP, Monarch Conservation Science Partnership, with USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service contributing. And they've developed this tool that is based on the All Hands on Deck paper, Thogmartin et al., that I believe still has not come out yet. But it breaks down the land into land use sectors and kind of looks at what are the potential for adding milkweed for each of those sectors. And then you can use that as a modeling tool to figure out where should we put our efforts and how much milkweed can we get on the landscape if we focus on, for example, road rights of way, agriculture, urban areas. So you can kind of see the contribution of each of these types of land. So we're going to be setting incremental time-bound goals for habitat additions and restorations by sector, by state, and then that will roll up into that whole region that I showed in the map in the last slide. So an interesting thing that we'll be talking about, hopefully in some of the working groups here, is that in that North Core area, there's a lot of science kind of linking stems of milkweed to monarchs in Mexico, to the overall monarch population. There isn't as much of a strong science kind of linking milkweed stems to monarchs in this region. So we think that the conservation targets that we're going to be setting for this region are going to be in acres and not milkweed stems. That's still in development, but that is an interesting topic that I think we'll be talking about over the next 2 days and figuring out, how do we measure what this region should be contributing and how do we keep track of how it's contributing. And a big point, obviously in Texas and Oklahoma, and as well as the rest of the core range of monarchs, is that private lands are going to be key to reaching any of these goals, especially agricultural lands. So just real quickly, the structure of how this is happening, this process is sort of housed within MAFWA's governance structure. We have a board of directors, including the 16 states involved in this project, plus one of the states from MAFWA. The advisory committee will be where NGOs and agricultural groups and other sort of non-governmental entities participate in this. Then there's an executive committee that's a subset of the board, and the technical steering committee and the technical working groups are going to be really sort of the boots on the ground of technical staff from states and partner agencies that are actually going to be figuring out how we're going to get all this habitat on the ground and writing it up into a strategy. And just as a final note, this might not even be a complete list of the partners that are participating in this, but this really is an effort that is involving a lot of government agencies at state and federal levels, as well as nonprofits, NGOs. We're definitely bringing in the agricultural sector as well. We're going to be bringing in transportation, utilities, academics. So it's really a project that's going to involve a lot of partners. And so I'm warning you, you might be on a working group soon. So just keep your eyes peeled. That's all I have. Thank you.